Hello, fellow lovers of music theory. Thanks for tuning into this screencast where we'll be analyzing a piece of music that's one of my favorites. My name is Reagan, and today I'll be taking you through an in-depth analysis of the first movement of Max Bruch's Violin Concerto in G minor. Together, we'll uncover the theory behind what Joseph Joachim called the richest and most seductive German violin concerto. We've got some great music in store for us. I'll begin the screencast with a brief history of the piece and its composer. Max Bruch, while writing this concerto, worked at the court of Koblenz in Germany as the music director. The concerto was premiered on April 24, 1866, with Otto von Cognislow as the soloist. However, Bruch wasn't satisfied with his work, so he revised the piece with assistance from Joseph Joachim. It was then re-premiered on January 7, 1868, and dedicated to Joachim, the soloist. It's not every day a concerto gets to be premiered twice. Flash forward 150 years, and this piece is considered to be Bruch's greatest musical composition. Due to the concerto's popularity, Bruch is often regarded as a one-work composer, despite the fact that he wrote 8 other violin concertos, several works for orchestra, a number of operas, and some chorales. He often fell under the shadow of a fellow German artist, Johann Brahms, who was the country's most popular composer at that time. Oxford Music Online also claims that the stubborn resistance he maintained to musical developments, largely instigated by Wagner, stifling any of his own originality, made audiences less compelled to hear his other works. There's an interesting story about the origin of this movement's name. Originally, the composer intended the first movement to be entitled Introduzione Fantasia. Instead, he went with Prelude as the title. Bruch had considered publishing this piece as a violin fantasy rather than a violin concerto. When he discussed this possibility with Joseph Joachim, the violinist recommended that the work should include concerto in the title. Michael Steinberg, a program annotator for the San Francisco Symphony, shared an excerpt of a letter Joachim sent to Bruch. The designation concerto is completely apt. Indeed, the second and third movements are too fully developed for fantasy. The separate sections of the work cohere in a lovely relationship, and yet, and this is the most important thing, there is adequate contrast. Bruch would later use the word fantasy for his second most famous work, Scottish Fantasy for Violin and Orchestra. So let's dive into what Philip Huescher, a writer of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, deemed the weightiest movement of the concerto. Through my own personal study of this piece, I've broken up the movement into 5 sections: the introduction, the first theme, the second theme, the third theme, and the conclusion. Or, if you were to label the movements with letters, the piece would go as follows: Section A, Section B, Section C, Section A prime, and Section B prime. To me, the sections resemble a palindrome. Pretty cool, right? You'll even hear melodies from the A and B sections return in sections A prime and B prime. For now, I'm going to pause the music so that we can focus on the theory at hand. In the introduction, you hear the timpani rolling for the first 2 measures, and the orchestra responds with one of the concerto's motives in measures 3 and 4, as you see in figure 1. The motive begins on a 1 chord, followed by a second chord in 7th, a minor second chord on the dotted quarter note, and then back to a 1 chord in first inversion, with the B flat doubled in the bass and the soprano. It repeats the same chord progression in the next measure. The timpani then holds another 1 chord for measures 5. And when the soloist enters, they play the main theme unaccompanied. You could venture to say that measures 6 and 10 are short cadenzas for the violinists. The cadenza in measure 6 begins on a G minor arpeggio, but the F sharp later in the cadenza transforms the scale into harmonic minor. Interestingly, the cadenza ends on the 5th scale degree, with a raised 4th preceding it, C sharp followed by a D. In measure 10, the soloist begins with another arpeggio, this time in E flat major. During the run, the A is lowered by an accidental, providing the ear with a stronger pull towards E flat major. In the retard that follows, the violinist alters between a G and an F sharp, returning the melody back to G minor. Between the 2 cadenzas, you'll hear the orchestra repeat their opening phrase in a slightly harsher tone. After the soloist completes their final cadenza, the orchestra enters again. Now they sound really mad. Maybe they were getting frustrated by playing the same motive over and over again. Bruch doesn't keep them there long, and soon the orchestra is given a new melody. As you can see in the example, you can see that they're altering between the first scale degree and the third scale degree, G and B flat, giving us a strong sense of the root. When the soloist enters in measure 16, we've officially entered the first theme, our B section. Things start to get really crazy in this portion of the concerto. A spot that I found personally tricky while learning this movement is found in measures 35 and 36, as you can see on the example. Bruch has the violinist play multiple chords in succession, some of which are spread across all 4 strings, which is not easy to do. While the first chord is a 5 chord in G minor, Bruch writes some G sharps in the following chord, placing the piece momentarily in A minor. During this modulation, the orchestra sits on a D major chord. Despite the difficulty, the effect of these chords gives the concerto a fierce edge. They catch the audience by surprise, something Bruch does several times throughout the movement. Bruch has more tricks up his sleeve as we enter into the third section of the movement. Suddenly, this dark, tense melody transitions into a much more romantic and smoother line. The transformation starts in the final beat of measure 45, which is also the start of the second theme, section C. Here, although the line is still tense, it begins to shift in a more gentle direction. Bruch modulates between G minor and F major at the start of this section, the orchestra with an F major chord in first inversion in measure 46. In both the violin and orchestral part, there are accidentals that raise the E, making it an E natural, which would be found in F major. However, there's still enough melodic tension that the piece doesn't quite settle into the written key signature, B flat major, until measure 52. You'll be able to, if you listened in the recording earlier, you could hear this transformation. Remember how I mentioned the return of melodies from previous sections? This happens in measures 56 and 59. The soloist plays ascending trills while the orchestra takes a turn providing the melody. To me, these measures mimic the timpani solo at the beginning of the piece. I have here an example from the part of the violinist, and as you can see, the timpani is also doing tremolos, so I can see a similarity between the two. The orchestra plays octaves in this section as well, repeating the melody that the violinist played previously in measures 47 and 48. Finally, we arrive at the most romantic line of the entire movement, measures 62 and 63. While the soloist reaches this section, their line soars above the orchestra. The line climaxes up to a high B in measure 66, then gracefully makes its way back down to earth, where Bruch masterfully changes the serene melody to an intense one. Notice how the melody in the darker section is a variation of the melody in the first theme, the B section of the movement. You guessed it, we've arrived at the third theme, the B prime section of the piece. It's easy to see how this section differs from the original B section in measure 90. Here, the soloist suddenly accompanies the orchestra with falling and rising chromatic scales as well as broken arpeggios. You'll hear the soloist begin with a D chromatic scale, then trickles into an E chromatic scale, which is then followed by arpeggios that start in D major. As the intensity builds, the soloist shifts through so many different key signatures. When you listen to the recording, you can try to track them. It's pretty difficult. From measures 108 to 144, the orchestra plays alone, allowing the soloist to catch their breath. How very considerate. In measures 141, Bruch returns us right back to the motive that was played at the beginning of the piece. This is the beginning of the conclusion, our A prime section. You can see the similarity between the two different sections. Once again, the soloist plays 2 unaccompanied cadenza passages. Beginning in measure 144, the first of these 2 cadenzas is a variation of the cadenza played in measure 6. The second one is a bit more complex, beginning on the 3rd scale degree. The start of the cadenza is very much in G minor. However, you'll hear the key fluctuate, especially in measure 149, where numerous accidentals suggest that we've shifted into G melodic minor. I feel as if the musical pressure has accumulated during this movement, and it's finally being released in this final run. Confession time. This section, although I titled it The Conclusion, doesn't truly conclude. Confused? Let me explain. After the soloist's final note of the movement in measure 153, right there, the orchestra repeats the main motive for 2 measures. Bruch then allows the orchestra to modulate from G minor to E flat major for the next 16 measures, as you can see in this passage. Bruch was no common composer. He created richness through dark, powerful phrases, a battle between melodic tension and freedom, and variations on the themes and motives. And as you can see, it goes straight into the second movement. There's no break, no pause. It's very uncommon for most concertos. Thanks so much for watching this screencast. I hope you enjoyed getting to explore Bruch's concerto with me today. Enjoy music theory.